we should not give up. We have to try our best to fight for justice, and we have to fight against racism, discrimination, wherever we live, regardless religion, language, nation, ethnic is. We have to stand for humanity. My name is Marif. I am a writer and a journalist based in Vancouver. I was born in Iraqi Kurdistan, and I have a master's degree in history. I'm a board member of SETAR, an organization fighting against racism. I also write several national and international platforms like New Canadian Media, Rebel, Toronto Star, Culture Washington Institution. Since I moved to Canada in 2017, I have written fiction and creative writing about the wars and the events happening in Iraqi Kurdistan, about the racism against the Kurdish people. Now I write about minorities and newcomers in Canada. I was born in 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War, which started between 1980 to 1988. Kurdish people paid the price first because my area was a epicenter of the war between both borders. Saddam Hussein became one of the horrible dictator in the world, and he killed many Kurdish people during the process called Anfal genocide in 1988. Then he used chemical weapon against my neighborhood town. At the time, Kurdish people wished to survive, and the Kurdish could kick out him in north of Iraq. It's a part of Kurdistan in Iraq, and the last three parts in Syria, Turkey, and Iran. My part in like Iraq liberated in 1991. However, Saddam Hussein still remained the president of Iraq until 2003. In the 1990s, the first Kurdish government became the government for them and became an umbrella to call all people there. But unfortunately, they start civil wars, and then there are a lot of corruption, nepotism, racism, discrimination in Iraqi Kurdistan, particularly after 2003, and the region divided between two classes. The richer, some people had power, and the poor. I witnessed many discrimination, racism, nepotism, and justice. So I decided to become an activist and a journalist. I started writing in 2007 for two newspapers. The first one called I mean, and the other one Daily Hawlati. And then I became a documentary researcher with a TV called Kenyan. During the time, I participated in many rallies with the people when they demonstrate, particularly in 2011, and then with teachers who protested for their right to salaries. And in 2017, before I came to Canada, I wrote against the Kurdish authorities, particularly about the former Kurdistan president Masoud Barzani. He wanted to stay in power, and he tried to hold a referendum for independent Kurdistan. But actually, he held the referendum for himself, for the sake of his position, not for the people. With my colleagues and many other journalists, try to raise awareness among the people. The referendum was not for people, for himself. We're not against the people's wish. It was the people's decision. They want to be independent from Iraq or part of the Iraq still. But we knew the situation in Iraq was not good, and the, the situation in Kurdistan was difficult because there were economic crisis, political crisis, and social crisis in Kurdistan. Despite these, the reason was all governments, like neighborhoods, stood against the referendum. And at the meantime, the coalition countries, like allied countries of the US and other countries, UK, France, Germany, stood against the referendum. So we wrote a lot about this on participate campaign, but the authorities threatened us, my colleagues and I, about why we wrote against them. and then we were called betrayer, traitor, and they tried to actually um, quiet us and not talk about the referendum. A few of my colleague friends, journalist friends in the capital of Kurdistan, Erbil, were raided and they were arrested. Before my city faced the same situation, I went to the U.S. Through the U.S. Counselor in Erbil in Kurdistan, and then I decided to move to Canada because I found Canada way better than the U.S. for me, because during the first Donald Trump's administration, I knew he didn't like the refugees, newcomers. So I found it Canada was a peaceful place for me. When I moved to Canada, I found doing journalism, what I did in Iraqi Kurdistan didn't work for Canada, because the Canadian readers, the Canadian audience wanted something different from what I wrote against the Kurdish authority in Kurdistan, because the majority of Canadian people have no information about the leadership, and they didn't care what happened about corruption and something like that. Instead of that, I focus on writing, creative writing, nonfiction, and I share the ordeals of the Kurdish people in Iraqi Kurdistan. Since 2017, I have written many stories, and I got grants, funds, fellowship about the stories where I wrote. At the same time, I wrote for two Canadian platforms, Rebel and New Canadian Media, where I focus on the problems of newcomers, because the reason why I wrote about those issues, because I found the mainstream media doesn't cover everything of it. There are some issues related to newcomers they didn't cover. Those things me to focus on the issues of newcomers. I have been writing about the minorities or sub-minorities in Canada, like the Kurds, Baluches, the Muslims in Myanmar, Muslims in China, Palestine, and I also participate in rallies, support those groups like Sikh people, Palestinian, and I become a kind of public speaker. I do speeches at libraries, universities, and other places where they invite me to speak. Uh, and I also write about the issues of Kurdistan, what's happening in the Middle East, in about the Kurds in Syria, Iraq, Turkey, and Iran. Because again, many people in Canada don't know about the issues in what's happening in the Middle East. And I can say I write in three levels and three different categories. At the same time, I do activism, like participating in rallies, speak for people, and all activities I do in Canada. Like many newcomers in the world, when they move to another country, exile is not easy, because you came from a place, it's not your desire, you didn't like to move, but you have to move. And it was my situation. When I was in Canada, I spent part of my mind in my home country, but when I came back to my home country, I find I am not part of the community, because I have moved there for a long time. There are a lot of changes, and there's something I feel nostalgic, not only in Canada, even in my home country, because I am neither part of the Kurdistan community nor in Canada. And sometimes I feel I'm excluded, because I try to write for mainstream media, but they don't accept my stories, and they say that doesn't work for them. Most of the stories I write about are the more like tragics, what happened with the Kurdish people. Many people say that those kind of stories may don't work for Canadian audience, and I found that's some challenge for me. I also faced a trauma with police, because in the late 1980s and 1990s, even now, I witnessed many violence and brutality by police. I remember during Saddam's time in 1989 and 1990, The Iraqi police torture people without a reason in Kurdistan. They were the Kurd, and they like to torture people. In 1990s, the Kurdish police did with own people. Unfortunately, there's something more hurt me than what Iraqi government did. I also a child labor in the borders between Iraq and I became a someone carry items between the countries, and I witnessed the Irani police brutalities and how they torture my father, my brother, my relatives. So those all things made me when I moved to Canada. I found I faced trauma because when I passed a police station or I saw a police car, I feel guilty and I say, oh, they may come to arrest me. But I said, no, I had no any guilt. I didn't do anything wrong. Why should it be like that? And that's come with me a lot. And I also become a walking sleeper at the night and just run, try to lock the door. It happened with me for a long time because that's come when I was in Kurdistan. I feel I was not safe, and my colleagues were killed or arrested. Those things came to me. Even now, I still have some problem. I had nightmares. I when I sleep, I lock the door and I check several times because if when I think, oh, I'm in Canada, it's okay, and I feel I have to sleep. So that's the challenges and I face. And whenever I see the situation in Canada, like fighting against sorry, being racism against Palestine and other people over there. That's something really hurt me, and I found I think that's a problem. Many activists in Canada face that situation because I see racism against Palestine, racism against and other minorities over there, even against the Kurdish people. Because when I meet with the Iranian, some Iranian people like Turkish people or Arab people over there, and talk about I say I'm a Kurd, or they directly tell me Kurdistan is not a country. You should say I am from Iraq, but I have to tell about my culture. I talk about my culture, not where I came from. And when they deny the Kurdish right, when they deny the Kurdistan, that's something hurt me, and that's a challenge. I say, okay, we have to work on that until they convince Kurdistan is a land and we belong to the Kurdish people. Despite the challenges, the difficulties, I start my journalism was something is my passion. Now I write for several platforms. What I do, I speak for people, and they learn about the Kurdish people, how the Kurds in four countries face racism and discrimination, how they face assimilation. And when people learn about the Kurdish issues, and then they tell others about the thing, which is something I like it. And I have been written three book chapters, and I actually finished two manuscripts. I'm going to publish them hopefully in 2025. And I achieved 4 or 5 diploma and certificates in Canada about working with minorities, leadership, how to fight against racism, discrimination, and all those things. Achieve my goals. And sometimes change my goals because the situation in Canada is different. But I think I'm on the right track, and I also published several stories about my home country, my childhood, and then I also become a board member of, as I mentioned earlier, it's an organization fight against racism, where I found a place to share about the Kurdish culture. I think I had two certificates, one of them for leadership. The second one, I became a teacher. I went to Hollyhock in BC. I was trained for writing and coaching. I think I'm not sure. It's people tells till if I am qualified, but I was invited to several universities and libraries and other places to share my stories, and I had a program to tell people why it's important to tell their stories, who came from other countries, and I can consider that one point is my success. I help many people to share their stories, become storyteller, which is something important for me. Based on the feedback I got, absolutely, I'm on the right track to be a coach. I think there is something I can mention is about when we stand with minorities, we should do for all nations, all minorities. For example, there are many Turkish people, Iranian or Arabs, stand with Palestine and the minorities. But when they came in for the Kurdish rights, with the Kurdish people, they insult the Kurdish people. They call them terrorists or other many nicknames. Something is really a kind of paradox because for me, if I fight for the Kurdish rights, that's true, and something I have to do it because the Kurdish people have been facing assimilation and displacement, racism in those countries for many years. I have to fight for, and now I can see Palestine go through the same ordeal, the same difficulties. That a disaster. There's a disaster in Palestine. I believe we all stand for Palestine. We all stand for the minority Baloch people in Iran, in Pakistan, for the minorities, for Sikh people in India. For me, when I call myself an activist, I have to do for all for like all my community the same. I believe all minorities should get their rights, should be have the same right as other people have. But unfortunately, many people in not many, but like many people came from abroad don't don't say about the Kurdish right, and even they deny the Kurdish rights. If I fight for the Kurdish right, I have to fight for other minority rights, other people who face discrimination and racism in the world.